Hello again, everybody. I'm Pat O'Malley, member of the Board of Directors and MC of the Maryland State Athletic Hall of Fame. This is a preview of the Maryland State Athletic Hall of Fame, the 56th induction ceremony that is set to be held on November 12th at Michael's 8th Avenue in Glen Burnie, Maryland. We have a very diverse class to go in what is the, as I said, 56th induction ceremony. In the 59th year of the organization, there were 3 years where there were no inductees. But this year, we have an extremely outstanding class. We have a lacrosse player who was a 4-time All-American at Johns Hopkins University in Del Dressel. We have arguably the best duckpin bowler on the male side ever, and that is Jeff Piles, who resides in Crofton, Maryland. And we have an outstanding pair of outstanding NFL football players, former football players. Kevin Glover from the University of Maryland, who went on to play 15 years on the offensive line in the National Football League, and that is tough. And also John Mackey, former Baltimore Colts great, who revolutionized the sport at tight end, and he will be inducted posthumously because he passed away a few years ago. Also, a track star from Carver High School in Baltimore who went on to big things at the University of Florida. He was in the Olympics, Bernard Williams. And we also have a former NBA player in Tom McMillan, who was an All-American at the University of Maryland, an Olympian, and then after his playing days, he became a U.S. congressman. He is going to be inducted as well. And then arguably the greatest third baseman of all time, Brooks Robinson, who is one of the greatest people of all time and someone that everybody in Baltimore loves. And those of us in Baltimore think he was the greatest. And anybody that saw the 1970 World Series, in fact, the country got to see Brooks Robinson, saw why when he almost single-handedly defeated the Cincinnati Reds in the Big Red Machine. And then we have two outstanding John F. Stedman Lifetime Achievement Award winners in Ed Hale, a Baltimore philanthropist from Sparrows Point High School, who is the owner of the Baltimore Blast and really the man responsible for keeping the old Baltimore Civic Center open. It's now the Mariner Arena. And he has done an awful lot for soccer and an awful lot to help people along the way. And probably the greatest PR director of all time. I'm sure Bernie, who I'll introduce here in a second, will agree. Jack Zane from the University of Maryland. He's an icon in public relations and the man that set the standard for public relations directors in the ACC. Jack Zane from Southern Maryland. Bernie Walter is the chairman of the Maryland State Athletic Hall of Fame, and I'm going to let Bernie tell you about the tickets, how you can get tickets to the event on November 12th. And then we'll discuss some of the individuals that are going in.
Thanks, Pat. The way we get tickets are two ways. First of all, you can use PayPal, and the way you would do that is you would go to our website, which is the Maryland State Athletic Hall of Fame, and the letters are MDSAHOF, Maryland State Athletic Hall of Fame, and you can use PayPal and buy tickets that way. The other way is that you could send a check made out to the Maryland State Athletic Hall of Fame to our post office box in Linthicum, which is P.O. Box 113, Linthicum, Maryland, 21090. That's the two ways. There's $75 a ticket. We think we have a good affair, and we got a great group of people.
Oh, we really do. And I want to commend you, Bernie, and I want the people out there to know that the Maryland State Athletic Hall of Fame was having some problems several years ago until Bernie Walter became the chairman and rejuvenated the organization now in its 59th year. And things have just gotten better and better each year. And in fact, this year's banquet will probably be the best that we've had.
Well, we hope so. We're trying to make it that way. We got a great committee. The committee works hard. It's a bunch of doers. I think that a lot of committees have people that don't hardly do anything at all, and almost everyone on our committee is a full contributor to what we're doing. I want to say one thing about the Hall of Fame people that's interesting. There's a University of Maryland connection. Of the 9 people that we're recognizing, 3 of those are from the University of Maryland. Kevin Glover, Tom McMillan, and Jack Zane all have great University of Maryland credentials. There's also Anne Arundel County connection. And a lot of people didn't even know this, is that, of course, Jack Sains from Southern Maryland went to Southern High School, the sports information director at University of Maryland forever. And then Jeff Piles, you've already mentioned, probably the greatest duckpin bowler ever, male duckpin bowler.
Yeah.
He's got to compete with Toots Barger
Toots
for being the
Barger.
best, but he's definitely the best male, all kind of records. And then the other is Bernard Williams, who works in the training facility down on Route 3 in Gambrills. Interesting thing is that we were trying to find him, and we did everything we could possibly do to try to find him, and we had basically given up. And this summer, we were at a baseball tournament up in West Virginia, and I'm sitting there with Neil Herrick and Steve Daugherty and other people, and Steve and I were lamenting about how we can't find Bernard, and Neil Herrick says, he works with me, because Neil does
wow.
baseball instruction out of that facility, so it was easy from that point on.
Bernie, speaking of Bernard, let's start with him as far as talking about the individuals that are going to be honored on November the 12th. Bernard, outstanding track athlete at Carver High School, and then went on to the University of Florida, and the Olympics, set a lot of records along the way.
Yeah, he was on the Olympic team. He ran the relay, and I believe he ran the second leg of the relay. And he was in Olympics twice and won gold medal, which was pretty impressive. I mean,
Yeah.
He's one of those kind of guys that it's taken a long time for him to get recognition, and maybe because we couldn't find him, but he's also a stand-up comedian. So I'm not sure what he's going to do in his induction ceremony, but be ready for anything. We could be very serious, and we could have a few jokes along the way as well.
Oh, that'll be great, but we do have a time limit on Bernard.
know.
We'll have to let him know that.
Yeah, you
that
will.
This won't be a stand-up event for him. Jeff Piles, and you mentioned, we mentioned Toots Barger, who is the all-time female points leader. Jeff set 7 world records in duckpin bowling. I mean, he was just, what an amazing career. And I believe he's still bowling, isn't he?
No.
No, he stopped.
He might be bowling for fun and recreation,
Yeah.
but he stopped competing. The first bowling competition he competed in when he was 17, he won, which was kind of amazing.
Yeah.
But duck pins is a Maryland sport.
Yeah.
I mean, Baltimore, Montgomery County, Prince George's. Years ago, there were duck pin bowling alleys everywhere. It's sort of gone away a little bit from the number of participants, but it's still a sport that started in Baltimore City. It started in a bar by John McGraw, John McGraw and Wilbert Robinson, two Orioles.
Yeah.
They owned a bar, and they were. I'm sort of going to say it was probably the first sports bar ever, because they invented duck pin
Yeah, there you
bowling,
go.
and they got some duck pins, or got some pins, bowling pins, shaved them down, and used a smaller ball, and that's how it started. And the reason why it was called duck pins is that when they hit the pins would fly like ducks on the Chesapeake Bay. So.
Oh, there you go. That's a nice little tidbit. Jeff, of course, was at our press conference that we held at Sports Legends Museum right near Camden Yards recently, and it was really great to meet him. I had never met him, and he was a very nice guy and very appreciative of this award.
Yeah, he's pretty excited. And one thing about our awards is that it's not just about the big sports, football, baseball, basketball, and things like that.
And lacrosse.
In lacrosse, in this area, lacrosse. But the thing is, we cover all the sports.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got power racing people in, we've got horses in, we've got a little bit of everything. We got duck pin bowlers, 10-pin bowlers. We try to hit everything. All the sports that are somehow.
Except for coaches and officials, we don't put them in.
Well, they're not in because you need to be an athlete, and even though you may have played the sport, you got to be outstanding athletically to get into this Hall of Fame as a player.
Speaking of lacrosse, too, I mentioned that Del Dressel, outstanding player at Johns Hopkins University, and he's a big guy. Meeting him at the press conference.
Yeah, he's a lot taller than both of us.
Yeah.
He's a successful doctor now, and works at Shepherd Pratt, I believe. In his playing career, he was on 2 national championship teams with Johns Hopkins in '84 and '85, and he was a first-team All-American 4 times.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And he's the 6th one to make that. Of course, back the guys before the 80s, there wasn't a whole lot of participation nationally for lacrosse. And about in the 80s and 90s is when it started to take off. So being a 4-time All-American, I don't care what sport you're in.
Yeah,
that's absolutely amazing.
It is.
He's a very articulate, intelligent guy, so I think we'll hear some good things from him.
Tom McMillan, he's still out there involved in various things involving helping people and doing things. He was a great player at Maryland. Lefty Drizel was beside himself when he was able to land him as a recruit because he was such an outstanding high school player. And he had got him to come to College Park, and they had 4 great years with Tom McMillan there and several others around him. And then he goes on to the NBA and plays 13 seasons and then later becomes a congressman and just a really well-rounded individual.
Yeah, he's a very, very likable person. When Drizel recruited him, Drizel made a statement that we could become the UCLA of the East, and we never quite did that. But he got Len Elmore at the same time. So those 2 guys were the keys to that whole run. Probably the greatest basketball game ever in the Atlantic Coast Conference was between NC State and Maryland.
Yeah.
And we missed that. A lot of controversy with today. I think some of those players that play may not have been eligible. The eligibility rules have changed significantly.
Wow.
And so anyway, but the point is Maryland didn't win, and only one team could go in the NCAA tournament at that time. If it was today, where you could come in as an at-large member, at-large participant, then we'd have probably been in that, and maybe NC State and Maryland would have played in the finals again.
Yeah.
The other thing is that he was on the Olympic team that lost to the Russians, or the Soviet Union at that time, and that was very controversial. If I remember correctly, it was 3 restarts. USA had won the game. They had won the game, and the referees kept restarting it over and over again, and eventually, they lost the ball game. Tom's done a lot of interesting things after he was a congressman. Out of the Crofton areas where he was the congressman. And then he also got on the board of the directors of health, physical education, recreation, dance, or fitness, whatever that title is. But he's a very hard-working guy, and I'm sure he'll say a lot of nice things.
Yeah, and back in the days when Lou Holmes was around, he's passed away, and he was involved with Lincoln Ferndale Youth Organization. He used to have Tom come up, and Tom got real involved around the county back in those days with baseball particularly, and was always around to help out to speak or just to talk to the kids in general. Kevin Glover, University of Maryland graduate, and what a career as an offensive lineman. And he, of course, was one of the key blockers for Barry Sanders and the great years he had with the Detroit Lions.
Well, I've heard that Barry Sanders would never have gotten a Hall of Fame without Kevin Glover, which may be
Did
true.
you hear that from Kevin?
I'm not going to tell you where I heard that. But anyway, Kevin was a center, made All-American, University of Maryland, and he also was All-Pro in the NFL. After his career in the NFL was over, he came to the University of Maryland, and he was on the football staff, and his responsibility was taking care of the athletes to make sure they stayed academically eligible and did the right things, on and off the field, which when he took that job, that was a big deal at the University of Maryland. And now he's the director of the M Club, which is athletes helping athletes. The idea is that it gives you pathways and entrances into your career. And that's his job, and it's the oldest organization in the country in college for those types of things.
Oh, is it? Yeah. The
It
M
was
Club?
M Club was the first one, and it's still working, and I pay my dues too.
Yeah. So. Well, at the press conference, Kevin took a lot of ribbing from Gene Fugit, who is a member of our board, a new member, and it's great to have him, a local attorney, and of course he played at Cardinal Gibbons and Amherst, and then later in the NFL with the Dallas Cowboys and all. And Gene spoke very highly of Kevin.
Kevin's a great guy. He really is, and he's not the typical person who brags about himself. He's kind of humble.
Yeah.
Good man.
Yeah. Now, some guys that play tight end in the National Football League now are bigger than John Mackey was, and John Mackey was a very big guy when he played, and he revolutionized that position. And you got Gronkowski now with the Patriots, who is a great tight end, but John Mackey was the man back when he played. I believe it was 9 years with the Colts, and then he finished with San Diego or somebody.
Yeah.
And now his wife, I assume, will be there to accept the award.
Yes, Sylvia's wife is going to accept the award. At least that's what we think. It possibly could be his son, but we think Sylvia's. I know Sylvia's going to be there. I've already spoken with her. That is one wonderful woman.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I don't know if you've ever met
Yes,
her or
yes.
whatever. She is really nice. We got when I called her to tell her what we needed to do and what had to happen or whatever. We talked for at least a half hour.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a big person talking on the phone. I want to get it over with. But she is really a nice person. She works for United Airlines. She's a flight attendant, and she flies internationally.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
She was at our affair a couple of years ago too, when Donovan went in, or Unitas.
She's been there before, and I don't think I met her at that time.
Yeah.
But she's a really nice lady.
Yeah, and some of our viewers out there might be wondering, well, you're mentioning John Mackey. He went to Syracuse and was not born in Maryland and all. And maybe, how come some of these guys didn't go in sooner? Well, the reason is, before several years ago, you had to be a native of Maryland to be inducted. In 1956 is when the Maryland State Athletic Hall of Fame began. And Babe Ruth, Jimmy Fox were members of that first class, the inaugural class. And since that time, it continued on for so many years until just several years ago. And we changed the bylaws, the new committee did. And you can be someone who was not born in Maryland, but maybe played for the Orioles or the Colts or somebody like that, and stayed around and contributed to the community, and made positive results that way. And John Mackey, of course, was one of those, and his wife has certainly done a lot. And that is, we call them adopted Marylanders.
Right. Originally, like back in the early 50s when the University of Maryland M Club started this, it was pretty easy to keep people, just to take the people from the state of Maryland. And the reason for that is that the transportation system and where people lived and moved and where the colleges recruited, and professional sports in some cases were relatively small at that time. Pretty easy. And there were plenty of people. But then along the way you had people like Brooks Robinson and John Unitas in particular, who were not from the state of Maryland, but did so much here after their career. And we decided that we wanted to be able to recognize those people who were outstanding contributors to the state. So, being here and being a good athlete, whatever sport you play in, whether it could be football, basketball, it could be college even, but if you don't stay here and live here and become an adopted Marylander on both sides of the street here, then you're not going to be considered for this. So if you're living in California and you're flying back here for just little meetings or whatever, that doesn't count. We're talking about people who actually live here, and you can see them at the restaurants and the ball games and different events that you go to. So.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. You and I talked about this before. Should we constantly be telling people about adopted Marylanders? And I say yes, because, like for instance, Drew Larkin, who was a lacrosse player and had a couple sons that played at Severn School and went on to college and all, were outstanding players. He lives in Severna Park, where I reside. And Drew saw the story the other day about the press conference recently, and he said, how come you never put Brooks in before? And then I explained to him, because there are a lot of people out there, a lot of our viewers, I'm sure, weren't aware of the adopted Marylander thing, and I think it's important to let them know about that.
Well, the old committee, before it stopped for a while, 3 years, like you said, and we got a new one, there was talked about how do we get these people in.
Yeah.
There's also another group of people that's kind of interesting, that's also covered, is that back in the 50s, if you lived in Prince George's County or Cecil County or maybe Carroll County or whatever, but you lived up near the borders, you may very well, your mother to have the baby and need to go to the hospital may have left the state, gone to Wilmington or Washington D.C. or wherever, and technically for a long time those people weren't eligible, and we decided that with people like that whose family was living here and the mother had to go a few miles to have their baby, we decided we'd get those people in as well, and that changed a few things as well.
Yeah, well, Jim Spencer went in a long time ago. Great first baseman for several major league teams, including the Yankees and the Oakland A's. He was born across the Maryland line into Pennsylvania because he lived up there at that time, and his mother went to a hospital there. But then, of course, he grew up in Maryland and later moved to Anne Arundel County and went to Andover High School.
I think one thing I'd really like to point out is that the cooperation we get with the Baltimore Orioles and the Babe Ruth Museum, or Babe Ruth's birthplace and Sports Legends Museum, is that on Utah Street we have a wall with plaques recognizing everyone we've put in the Hall of Fame since 1956. That stays there forever. And then and the Orioles allow us to do that with the Maryland Stadium Authority. And then the Sports Legends with Mike Gibbons, who's on our board. We have the basement. We have a room where all the names are recognized, and there's a little thing that you can read a short bio of everyone in the Hall of Fame, and there's also some of our memorabilia in there. So we get good support, and And then the other thing that we do is have our banquet coming up, November 12th.
State Hall of Fame, yes.
State Hall of Fame. Thank you.
November 12th. Speaking of adopted Marylanders, we wanted to put him in a couple years ago, but he was having some health problems, and he looked great at the press conference. Brooks Robinson from Little Rock, Arkansas. And I think it's so great that we're finally able to put him in, because what a man, as a baseball player and as a person.
We've tried to put him in 3 times. And all 3 times, he had some type of health problem.
Yeah.
And what he was doing, he was canceling event after event after event. And when he got healthy again, he started going to those places in order that they were canceled. And we were kind of down the line, so that's one of the reasons why it's taken us 3 years. But he's done so many things for baseball in this area and sports in general. One of the things that I was really happy to work with him on was back in 1981, we wanted to do the
Crown.
We wanted to do an all-star game, and I was on the state high school baseball committee, and I proposed that, and everyone said, "That's a great idea, Bernie. Just go ahead and get it set up, and we'll help you." Well, anyway, so I went to the Orioles. Tommy Giordano was the general manager of the Orioles. He was very receptive, thought it was a great idea. Orioles were in, they'd help us. We could use Memorial Stadium, and I was real happy. Then he said, "But you got to use one of our sponsors." Well, I'm a high school baseball coach. Who do I know?
Yeah.
Do I know any of these big sponsors? I don't have those kind of connections. But I did know Brooks from when he first came to Baltimore. Yeah. So I wrote him a letter, and about 6 weeks later, he called and said, let's go to lunch with the vice president of Crown Central Petroleum, and we'll see what they think. So, and that started it. But it was all because of Brooks Robinson and his connection with the Crown Central Petroleum that we got a sponsor who could sponsor the game, and then that met the Orioles criteria. Went along for a good while. I'm not sure about this year, but it's maybe about 8 years ago, something like that, when Crown went out of business.
Yeah.
And when they went out of business, of course, we lost the sponsor. And Brooks called me and told me that the sponsor was gone. And he said, "Well, I'll sponsor it." So he was going to sponsor the game himself personally, which is just beyond comprehension, in my opinion.
Then you got Geyer Financial involved.
Well, Geyer Financial was the ones who were handling his financial situation. So when he went to them and said, "Listen, I'm going to do this," they said, "No, we'll do it." And now it's the Geyer Brooks Robinson All-Star Game sponsored by Geyer Financial.
Yeah,
Pretty cool.
That was pretty neat. And he always stayed involved too. Like he used to show up to the press conferences and he'd come to the game and things like that.
Still does that.
Yeah.
He was at the last press conference. He was involved. It just wasn't something he put his name on. He was actively involved in a lot of that stuff.
Well, yeah, 16 consecutive Gold Gloves is amazing at third base, and of course that 70 World Series against the Big Red Machine. He was just unbelievable, and the country got to see Brooks Robinson finally and realize why we thought so highly of him. But there were so many other things he did off the field. He was always nice to the fans. You never heard a story that he shunned someone. He'd be in a restaurant, someone would come up and want an autograph, he would sign it. Never turned down autographs to little kids or older people. And just if I can just tell two brief things. Back when I was doing radio on NAV back in the 80s, I did a lot of talk shows around various establishments in Anne Arundel County, mainly Annapolis. And I would usually have a major guest, people like Lefty Driesell, Chris Thomas, the late Chris Thomas from BAL, people like that, and Brooks. Well, from time to time over the years there, someone would cancel on me. And I'd call Brooks. Now, I knew Brooks. He wasn't a close friend, but he was a friend. And I knew him from baseball and everything. And I'd call him up and ask him if he could do the show. I said, I had somebody cancel him. I'm in trouble, He would just laugh. I'll be there. Yeah. And he would come. He would show up. That's the kind of stuff he did. And he didn't owe me anything. And then when I was baseball coach at Loyola High School back in the early 70s, and you, of course, were at Arundel then, he had a son, Brooks. His name was Brooks also. He was a left-handed pitcher, and he was on the team. And we started in early February. The weather, it was back in 73 or 74, the weather was terrific that year, and you probably remember that. But anyway, we had a practice, and Brooks had showed up that day to watch, and I got him to coach a little bit. Well, then we took a break, or maybe it was at the end. He sat down in the outfield, in the grass, with all the kids around him, and just sat there and talked baseball with them for about an hour. And man, those kids were so thrilled to have Brooks Robinson there, just sitting around talking. He was just an amazing person. I
got a Brooks Robinson story too. Won the Mayo American Legion Post 226. We won the World Series, which was the first time in like 80 years that a team from Maryland had won that. And the Legion Post was going to have a dinner for us. And anyway, we invited Brooks and John Stedman to speak to the players. Well, that particular night there was a blizzard in Baltimore, and all our players were at the Post Legion for this party, whatever, and some of their parents. And this blizzard was going on right then. And the first phone call I got was from John Stedman. And John Stedman at that time just lived across the Bay Bridge on Eastern Shore. And he said, "I'm coming. I'll get there as soon as I can." Well, he got there on time because he lived so close. Brooks called a little while later, and he said, "I'm stuck on the Beltway, but I'll be there." Now, at that time, I think he was living out in the Parkville area, I believe. And to come from Parkville down to Annapolis to speak to a bunch of kids about winning the World Series was amazing. But both of those men showed up. And, I mean, in a blizzard, you got people don't even want to go across the street to buy a loaf of bread. They got to do it before. And these two guys showed up during the blizzard. I mean, it's just amazing the kind of people these two guys were.
John Stedman, of course, we have named over the years the John Stedman Lifetime Achievement Award. John was a winner of the award in the early years, and now this year we have two that are going to receive the award. I believe it's the second time that has happened. Ed Hale and Jack Zane. Ed Hale, what can you say about him? He's just done a lot for Baltimore in general.
Well, Ed Hale, the thing that makes him eligible for what we're doing is his leadership and owner in the Baltimore Blast. Indoor soccer, soccer is a big deal in our country today, and it really started in East Baltimore, as far as I know, as being a big deal. I mean, those teams from Patterson Park and Archbishop Curley, and they had national championship teams in amateur sports, and he was more or less from that area. And when he took over the ownership of the Blast, and now he's a leader in various leagues of the Indoor Soccer Association around the world, or United States, I should say.
Yeah.
And he's done a great job with that. That's where his strength is as far as what we're concerned. But he's also been involved with youth sports and things like that to make sure soccer goes, whatever. He's a big promoter of it. So
Was Jack Zane the sports information director at Maryland when you were there?
Jack Zane was a sports information director forever. I mean, he knew every athlete on every team, and and he really did that forever. But the one thing about Jack Zane is that he got to work closely with some of the greatest coaches ever in the history of the University of Maryland. Jim Tatum, Lefty Driesell, Gary Williams, and all those big name coaches.
Yeah.
And his job was to get the sports information out. And if you ever sit down and talk to him about how he did that, it was pretty easy why Maryland had so many All-Americans when he was the sports information director. And I just respect that man tremendously.
And I know you certainly think a lot of him, and you're one of his biggest fans. But Teresa Vermillion, who is our computer whiz for our website, which I'll give to the viewers in a moment, she just thinks he's the greatest, and I think she's right on.
Well, that's her uncle.
Yeah.
And Teresa's also a duckpin bowler.
Yeah.
So she's an athlete, and she's in the Anne Arundel County Hall of Fame.
So is Jack.
Yes, yes. And so you got people who have a real Anne Arundel County connection, but Teresa Vermillion is in charge of she's our webmaster. You want to give the website?
Yes, mdsahof.com. And www at the beginning, you don't have to put that in, but that's basically it. And you can get more information on the banquet and all about the Maryland State Athletic Hall of Fame by going to the website, mdsahof.com. Also, one more time, Bernie.
Let me say something.
Sure.
The website, Teresa's worked tremendously on that.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, it was a mess.
Yeah.
And she's taken it over. We're very proud of that. That's one of the real big improvements that we've done with the Hall of Fame, is to have a legitimate website with all kind of information on there. And so we would hope you would go look at it. Go look at it and see what's there. You also can nominate people there.
Yeah.
That's what a nomination form is. So if you have someone that you think meets the criteria, we'll consider anyone that is nominated.
Okay, one more time. November 12th is the date, Michael's 8th Avenue in Glen Burnie, Maryland. You can get information on tickets from our website, or can they call you or anybody else?
Just mail the check to Maryland State Athletic Hall of Fame, Post Office 113, Linthicum Heights, Maryland, 21090.
And tickets are?
$75 a piece.
And that's an open bar?
Open bar. There's a cocktail hour. It starts about 6 o'clock. About 7 o'clock, we'll have dinner, and then we'll start the program.
All right, well, we're looking forward to seeing, we hope many of you that are watching this preview at the State Hall of Fame dinner on November the 12th. For Bernie Walter, this is Pat O'Malley saying, so long, everybody.